What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to the Homebrewed Christianity Podcast, the theology podcast, where we, for over 10 years, have been bringing you ideological ingredients so you can brew your own faith. And today, on the podcast, you get to experience the live crossover episode of this podcast, Homebrewed Christianity, with another podcast, Science Mike, with my friend Mike. Surprisingly, Science Mike's name is Mike. Ha! Anyway, this live episode was recorded in Minneapolis as part of the Jesus Wrote a Dinosaur event that Mike and I were both part of. It's a blast. It's exciting. You will also get to hear during this episode from Paul Wallace. That's right. Paul Wallace is an astrophysicist, and we talk about science and religion with Paul. And then we talk to Kenda Creasy Dean, who is a professor of youth culture and such at Princeton Theological Seminary. We talk with Kenda about parenting teenagers and thinking about parenting theologically. We also answer a stack of questions from the audience, and it was a good old time. So good, in fact, was this conversation with Science Mike that we decided we're going to do an event together this November 8th through 10th in North Carolina in the Triangle. So if you want to know the moment the tickets go on sale, because for 72 hours they're going to be significantly cheaper than all the other hours in which they're on sale, then go to cosmiccampfire.party. That's right, cosmiccampfire.party. Cosmic with a C, not a K, not hip. Cosmic, C-O-S-M-I-C, campfire, C-A-M-P-F-I-R-E, .party, P-A-R-T-Y. That is the URL. You'll be there. You'll be able to sign up to get the email with access to the tickets the moment they go on sale in the very near future. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a 3-day event. We're going to talk about cosmic origins, deep ecology, human evolution, real transformation. It will be a scientifically rigorous, skeptically persistent, experimentally intoxicating, and spiritually humble pop-up community where you can get to roast marshmallows and talk about God. It's what would happen if Rumi, Julian of Norwich, Darwin, Lao Tzu, Socrates, or Socrates, and Jesus made s'mores together. Yeah, that's what's happening at the Cosmic Campfire, November 8th to 10th. So sign up so you can get your invite to the event ASAP. Now, other things I was going to tell you before we jump in. The one and only Robin Henderson Espinosa and I are going to be doing a reading group this summer called Theologies of Resistance. In it, we're going to read 4 different theologians who are theologians of resistance. We're going to read MLK, John Sobrino, James Cone, Rosemary Radford Ruther. And each one of them looks at a different way. We can theologically imagine, fund, and inspire resistance to nationalism, patriarchy, racism, empire. And if you want to join that group, which is open to everybody, all you have to do is go sign up, and anyone can join. You can donate, or you can do it for free. See, we want as many people as possible, those interested in theological resistance, to join the class. And you'll be a part of the Facebook group. You'll interact with other people that are people of faith that also like nerding out and, figuring out how to stick it to empire, racism, patriarchy, and nationalism. Last but not least, guess what? Theology Beer Camp, August 16th to 18th in Asheville, North Carolina. Get on it. Get your tickets. Hurry up and do it. There's only a few left. We need to sell the last tickets to Theology Beer Camp, and we need to ensure that you wondered if I knew you were listening. I am. I needed to ensure you were going to be there. See, there's 3 days in a brewery. We're going to have intense theological reflection. Robin Henderson Espinosa is going to be there. Travis McMacken, Donna Bowman, author of The Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Being Human, is going to be there dropping a talk about whether or not the future of the church is MAGA hat or pussy hat. Get on it. Bill Leonard's going to be there, author of the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Church History, Baptist historian extraordinaire. He's going to be in the house. You need to sign up. We're going to have friends from a whole bunch of podcasts. Nathan Gilmore from The Christian Humanist is going to be there. Theo Sophia, that's right, Sarah, is going to be in the house. Ooh, we might even have multiple twisted cis turds. Yeah. I'm just saying. Yeah. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then remember, just a heads up, in September, it's going to be the 3 days, the second week of September, where you can stream and have a house screening party of my movie, The Road to Edmond. I'm so pumped about it. But you can find out more about that by going to theroadtoedmond.com. You can find out more about all this stuff by going to homebrewedchristianity.com. Sign up for the email list, and you'll get notifications about events, about books, about recent SESTI interviews, about free stuff we like to give away to the group. Like last month, we gave away an entire class to everyone on the email list, an entire class around varieties of postmodern theologies. Yeah. If the people opened their emails and looked, they would have discovered that they had the opportunity to get a class for free. That's just kind of the love I try to spread. All right? So, here we go. We're going to be jumping into this live podcast with my friend Science Mike. You're going to hear it. You're going to go to the cosmiccampfire.com. No, cosmiccampfire.party. Yeah, you're going to do it. And last but not least, this episode of Homebrewed Christianity is brought to you by our sponsor for this episode is the movie Camp Manna. You can check it out at campmanathemovie.com. Camp Manna the movie is a movie about Ian. He's a non-believer. He gets shipped off to some backwards Christian camp where he's forced to compete and possibly survive in a biblically themed Olympiad known as the God Games. Gary Busey's the camp director. It's a lot of fun. If you grew up evangelical, you went to crazy Jesus camps, then you'll not only get to laugh at your past, but you'll get to make some peace with your past through the power of laughter. It's a lot of fun. You heard the two writers and directors on the podcast not too long ago. The movie's now out. You can get it on like Amazon Prime Video, get it on iTunes, get it on Google Play. But definitely go check it out. And remember, the movies that make us laugh. The movies that make us laugh. They're a treasure. Yeah. Just like you're a treasure. You are a treasure. That was my attempt to close it like a summer camp sermon. Without the whole don't go to hell for all eternity bit. I'm not really good at delivering that message. If I was, I'd probably do better, financially speaking. Because I feel like hell is a great motivating tool. If you tell people that already believe in it about hell, and that they might be going there, even though they thought they've been washed in the blood and stuff, then you put them in a prime position to secure their eternal salvation again. But I don't really worry about that anymore. But if you'd like a no holds barred curiosity cauldron where no big ass question of ultimate meaning will go unanswered, then you should go to the cosmiccampfire.party. Boom. Talk to y'all later. Hello, everybody, and Jesus wrote a dinosaur. You're about to experience a live Science Mike and Homebrewed Christianity podcast. So in this live experience, there's going to be a variety of interactions. We're going to talk. Then we're going to be all like interstellar and junk with a physicist. Then we're going to talk about youth and what's not failing at parenthood. And then we're going to answer questions.
Yes.
And
I'm going to drink alcohol.
Yeah.
Out of a flask.
And part of my solidarity with you during this experience is that I too am going to drink.
Amazing. We're recovering fundamentalists.
Greater
for sure.
love has no man than the one that lays his soberness down for another. So let's begin. And here's the thing, Mike. You have probably, and you've even complained on the podcast, but you wouldn't call it complaining. You would have not done it in a negative way. But you've said that the retelling of a certain parts of your story has created distance from them.
Yes.
So don't tell me that story.
Great. I'm already relieved.
I know. I want to know what was the question in your life of faith growing up? You're conservative, Southern Baptist and stuff. What was the question that didn't come and you decided to go apologetic style on your 5th grade science teacher? which I heard about today. I'm sorry for that science teacher. But the question that when you had it, it stung, it lingered, and you knew the script you were handed religiously didn't work.
There's two. They're pretty common. What's with divine genocide in the Old Testament?
Can I get an amen? What's with that? We're against it, just to clarify.
Officially anti-genocide.
Yeah.
We are very progressive. I think that is white dude progressive, isn't it? Like, we're against genocide.
Yeah.
Did somebody have a cookie for me?
Yeah.
I need validation desperately.
No. The next step is that you ordain women, but don't give them senior minister jobs. That's the...
That's like beyond my awareness. I was Baptist too recently. I'm still just like ordaining women. Whoa! The other one was, why are some prayers answered and not others? That would be my other stinging question.
And who's had that question before?
Richard Dawkins.
And who's asked that question a million times? Had that question asked to them over and over. There were lots of hands each time. Now, as a youth minister, how many of you are confident that you failed to answer that question correctly repeatedly? Yeah. When you fail it and it demonstrates you have a lot of student loans, that's the worst.
Oh.
Like when they're like, well, I prayed and like it says, like if you have enough faith, it could move a mountain. So like maybe I would, be able to study enough to get this test so I can get into this school and blah, 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 blah. All the things American consumer capitalism needs you to do to demonstrate your success and stuff. And I was like, maybe your prayer was to an alternative religion called economism and it professionally doesn't answer prayers. And they were like, what are you talking about? I just wanted to stay awake for the SAT. And then I was like, whatever, God's not in control. Omnipotence sucks. And they're like, what's omnipotence?
# process theology.
And or biblical Christianity.
Oh man, you throw around biblical Christianity.
No, but
aren't
omnipotence is not in the Bible. Here's a true story. So, God has two divine names other than the one Hagar gave in the Bible. Heads up, a female who's not even part of the elect names God before anyone else does. That would be good news. Then you have like Yahweh, and there's a whole story about that. But El Shaddai, that's the kicker. In Hebrew, I've asked multiple rabbis, it's either mountain refuge or well-breasted mommy.
Right.
Which, if you think about agricultural periods, like you need females to stay wet so they can feed people. And if God is the mountain refuge you go to or the mom that's titties never run dry, and that's the actual name of God, El Shaddai, it would make a celibate man named Jerome in the first century awkward when he translates the Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate. So when he gets to El Shaddai, he can't translate because only celibate dudes are reading this. He can't be like, and God's name is the well-breasted refuge. Like, like little 18-year-old, my first time reading this part in the Vulgate, like, priest is gonna sin. So, what's patriarchy's like natural motive when you come into and powerful life affirming female images of the divine? You project hypermasculinity on them, so you get like almighty is what Jerome translates that El Shaddai from Hebrew into Latin. Obviously it wasn't almighty, but that's the English equivalent. And now everyone's litanies at church has almighty in it when you should really just substitute well-breasted deity who never runs dry because God's always ready to hold you, nurse you, and keep you. And so, yeah.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank you on behalf of every listener of Ask Science Mike for saying titties for the first time in the history of the podcast. It's literally never been said on the show.
Dude, if we had a list of 10 words that haven't been said, I would try to fit them in.
I've definitely said breasts, but never titties. Never.
The first person that said titty on Homebrewed Christianity was Catherine Keller, but she was quoting a John Cobb, and which for Science Mike listeners that aren't theology nerds, those are very famous progressive theologians. Sorry. Anyway, so those are two excellent questions.
I have a question for you on behalf of the Ask Science Mike community.
All right.
How is theology a thing?
What do you mean?
Like, how do you know? I'm serious. My crew is literally like, yes, he never says because he doesn't know. How does one know what is a right or good theological theory or framework?
Because
I know you know.
Well,
because you're just like, brrr, and I'm like, whoa.
So the content.
Shit.
So it's important when you're doing theology and you're assessing its validity to decide what is valid. So during the Enlightenment, we shrunk what made theology valid to truth, because we were trying to compete with the antagonism that emerged in anti-intellectual Christianity. So we decided what is good theology? It's true theology. So you get fundamentalists who are like, here are the fundamentals. If you don't believe these, you're not a Christian. And that means you shouldn't use your brain because the earth is a few thousand years old. You know that variety.
I know it well.
But then you also get a variety of kind of rejection of that modern liberal theology, that what does good theology look like is one that supports particular moral responsiveness. And that too kind of minimizes the vision of Christianity to good ethics. I think the primary eternal virtue that, and this is not just me, this is like medieval mystics and such. There's a debate. Is truth primary, goodness primary, or beauty primary? And one of the biggest decisions when thinking about how you do constructive theology is which is at the top of that triangle. I think the appropriate answer is beauty, because religious embodiment, religious experience, the part of your existence that can be examined scientifically but can't be really affirmed or denied or encapsulated, is our emotive, subjective responsiveness to eye contact while making love, hearing Mozart, a friend forgiving you and you didn't know it was there, and stuff like that. And those are beautiful. They're also good and true, but the beauty's a compelling part. So when you start to think about what is good theology, I think it's better to ask what is aesthetic theology or what's beautiful theology. So you've had, in contemporary theology, people have switched from theology to theopoetics as a way of demonstrating that switch. But you've also had ones that recognize the tradition isn't a reservoir of truths to be organized and demonstrated, affirmed, and then teach y'all all to repeat it at church. But the tradition is a lively conversation about what it means to be human, what it means to live before the ultimate, what it means to embody justice. And part of doing theology is getting to know your ancestors and arguing with them. And for the church, the two biggest tasks, I think, are going to the catacombs of the Art Museum of Theology, because we have our, the ones that get featured, and pulling out voices and experiences that haven't been featured in the Art Museum of Christian Witness and Testimony. And the other is rearranging them so that the categories that were determined either by medieval scholasticism, early modern response to Enlightenment, or kind of anti-intellectual, responding to anti-intellectual in Christianity, they don't define Christianity. And so what is it like to take a tradition, the conversations, the questions, and arrange them so that as you encounter them, you're invited into more beautiful living in community, inspired by the life, ministry, death, resurrection of Jesus, which is kind of a crazy thing to organize a museum around.
I'll be honest.
Good.
I expected that to be more fluffy and less substantive. I'm surprised to nod my head along with the theology answer, so thank you. Not only for the scotch, but an explanation of theology that doesn't make me roll my eyes as someone who's like primarily a materialist. That appeal to beauty and community, I think I wouldn't have put it in those terms before I heard you say it, but is actually how I approach my faith experience. I just never thought of that as theological, because I'm always a guy that makes jokes that all theology is fan fiction. Like, I might enjoy it, but it's not grounded in reality.
I mean, if you'd like to pursue that further, we can, but that should probably be a completely different conversation, because I would go on.
I was doing a little groundwork for whatever happens later, because there's so many non-religious and explicitly atheistic listeners on my program. Mm-hmm. So whenever someone's on in theology, which, by the way, people beg for more theology on Ask Science Mike, but I have such a sensitivity to my atheist homies.
want to know something
I wanted to
cool?
lay a groundwork so people know where you're coming from.
So a lot of like atheist political philosophers are writing theology books today. So if you were doing a philosophy degree, not in the, the type that's obsessed with logic, but if you were doing continental philosophy,
the scotch is not as good in the nose.
Yeah, I agree. You know how many other things are better in the mouth than in the nose? Filtered water. Gosh. Perverts.
That's one. This is going to be strip podcasting. See, now I made you blush. It's going to be the cycle, mutual blushing.
Well, that should be the episode title, Mutual Blushing. You drink your scotch, I'll tell you about theopoetics. So but I actually think it is a interesting. So that continental philosophy, you have people like Zizek, Agamben. It's pointless saying it. Anyway, a lot of famous philosophers that are very much materialist atheists have, in our contemporary political situation, gone back to reading like Paul and theology, because the question they're asking is, with the downfall of the Enlightenment and modernity, when you see the failures of nation states, democracies, global capitalism being problematized, what is a way to talk about anything? How can you believe one damn thing in a way that brings people together to act in a way that's not scripted and determined by the market? And so you have a bunch of atheist philosophers that are like, well, there's this one dude, I don't believe anything he thought, but Paul was effective. And so you now have if you go to a theology conference, it's easy to, to have 30% of the theologians not being theists, but think that in religious traditions and in the prophetic religious traditions, the monotheist ones that have materialist commitments, as allies and thinking of what it means to be human, what it means to be community, and what it means to call people together, where the scripted narratives they've inherited and determine their materiality are not final.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good.
It's dangerous to pause that long because I just lapse back into talking. So go ahead. Okay, we should pray right now that the Lord would lead an astrophysicist to the table.
Are you implying that the deity has consciousness, will, and agency?
I am. That is like an hour and a half, aside.
I just thought I'd throw that just real quick. Just.
Oh my God. I just want you to know, Homebrewed Christianity listeners, that on behalf of hospitality, I'm not going to take an invitation to debate whether or not. I wouldn't
debate.
No, I know you don't debate. The whole we're going to have a podcast battle. And Mike's like, actually, I'm nice. I don't argue. I try to avoid conflict. And I'm like, yeah, but Tony was helping organize the event, and our relationship, our friendship is built on the fact we both think we're smarter and more correct than the other one. And we don't take our ideas that seriously, so we professionally argue with each other, and that's like a sign of endearment. There's at least one member of my family with your personality, and they feel ostracized too, so it's okay. I just am like, why did you come to Thanksgiving? The whole point of Thanksgiving is to get done, and then we drink and smoke on the front porch and argue for a couple hours. And then we never mind. I know my mama hear this. I shouldn't even. Dear Lord Jesus, if an astrophysicist could please come to the microphone.
So I've been a fan of yours for quite some time. True story.
Yes, Mike. What can I do for you?
I legit have been.
You have.
We went to an event in D.C. together.
That's right.
For the Museum of the Bible.
For the Museum of the Bible.
Which I was very surprised to be invited to.
I was a little surprised too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you were probably more surprised than me because you were a little bit more of a fish out of water than
the word you're looking
than
for
the
is
rest of
apostate.
us academic nerd types.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was
sure.
both not an academic and not considered a Christian by most people. It's according to the Bible. It's like a 2-for-1 special.
Right, not real orthodox.
Yeah, not real orthodox.
Yeah.
But they went to talk to you.
Okay.
And I was like, whoa, not only a Christian, but like a legit scientist.
Yeah.
Not an internet science person.
Right.
But like a scientist.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually done, yeah.
Yeah, done science.
Done science.
Like actual
yeah.
science.
I know what it feels like.
So that's when I kind of swoon. Some people see like musicians or actors and they swoon. And when I see real scientists,
you told us today
oh
how you were such an uber nerd. And so scientists would be your rock stars.
They are. Yeah. So what I'm saying is you're my rock star. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
So
I've never been anybody's rock star before.
That's just like back of book material. I don't know if you've thought about this, but on the back of your next book, it's like, you are my rock star, Science Mike.
That baby's going to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So I'm going to ask you something.
Will you blurb my book?
Of course I'll blurb my next book.
Oh my gosh. In front of people. What if you said, maybe?
Well, it's like those people who like ask somebody to marry them in front of a professional basketball crowd, and the woman says no.
Oh, that's brutal.
It's not as awkward as doing a wedding where like we're like, I don't think I can do this today.
Has that happened to you?
Yes.
Yeah. I feel so
Has that
legit
really
right
happened
now.
to you?
Yeah, but y'all talk about physics.
I really want to hear that story.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
If you do a good job talking
Yes,
with
sir.
Mike.
So I'm gonna alley-oop
Go for
something I hear often from
And you want me to
my
dunk it?
atheist listeners.
Okay.
So you're an actual scientist.
Yes.
How do you do good science and hold to the idea of like a creator or a deity?
I don't think about that while I'm doing science. I just do science.
Okay.
I don't think, what would God think of me for working on a quasar? It doesn't come into like any scientist will tell you, they're thinking about this data. They're thinking about this feature of the world. They're not thinking about God in any explicit sense. Now, I feel like I actually am God's back behind all of it, but I'm not thinking explicitly about God when I work. And I haven't done science for a number of years, but for 15 solid years, I did it. Yeah. And I never thought about God while I was doing it. I might have thanked God that the data came in the way I wanted it to.
Wait, you mean scientists have a preferred outcome for experiments?
Yeah, because they got to publish, baby. And they know that if the data comes in the way they don't want it, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's tough on the next grant.
Yeah, they're just people. They got careers. They got to feed the kids.
So when you're doing science, you're not explicitly thinking about God. But do you see God revealed in physics or astrophysics?
Yes, but not while I'm doing it. I'll think about it later. I might write a poem about it later, but I'm not going to, while I'm doing it, you're just trying to figure out what the world is like. You know, you want to know, what is the world? What is this place that we live in? And you're just trying to figure out the next tiny little question, tiny little answer, little brick in the wall, you know, of knowledge. That's all you're doing. But there's a deeply interactive sense. I remember I was working on this quasar. It's quasar, 3EGJ2006 minus 2321. It's a quasar. It's 7 billion light years away, which means that the light left it 7 billion years ago, which means that the Earth wasn't even formed when the light left this quasar. And I was trying to identify it as a particularly rare kind of quasar. And there was one more bit of information that I needed to know if it was the kind of quasar I suspected it was. And there were only a handful of them known. It was a rare beast, a rare bird. And when that last piece of information came in from a colleague in Brazil, I got this information, I got this data, and I knew it. And I felt like I had connected myself with this object 7 billion light years away, and that was a cosmic experience. You know, it was like the world, despite all the crap, that doesn't count as a bad word. Absolutely not.
Like
my
horse
kids
shit would.
Yeah, like shit.
That would.
Yeah.
You said like that crock of shit. That
Yeah, right. Like my kids can't say shit, but they can say crap, so it's not a bad word. Okay. I felt connected to this thing, and this thing is 7 billion light years away. There's no possible way to imagine that, but it was definitely a sense of, I felt at home, like the world, despite all the crap, does make sense at some deep level. That's what happens. And is that religious? I think it is. Not traditionally so, perhaps, but I think absolutely it is.
What was your relationship like with other scientists as a believer? Did that ever come into play?
Yeah, well, I've encountered very little hostility. Okay. Very little hostility from other scientists. I think I'm treated more as a curiosity, like, look, a scientist who believes in God, and isn't that odd and unusual and amusing?
But you're a physicist, right? So
yeah.
One of the grants I helped with did not in front of people surveying of the scientists about their spiritual religious beliefs, and physicists have over 50% affirmation of a transcendent other.
Yeah.
And so the less hard your science is, like if you think like physicists, chemists, much more likely to believe in an ultimate reality.
I've got a theory about that.
By the time you get to...
I can't wait to hear what you're going to call the least hard of the sciences.
The least hard social sciences, because they were founded by atheist materialists that use Marx and a certain other variety, so it enculturates atheism. But...
what do you really think, Tripp? Did you just say all social scientists are Marxists?
No, I'm saying that the theories that are foundational to it are deterministically materialist, and physicists tend to be idealist.
Yeah.
And chemists tend to err on the side of physics. If you
err on the side of physics.
You know what I mean?
That's funny. It's all right. You can go on.
I meant if you're taking the spectrum of the less hard your science is, the less it is determined by math, then the less likely you're to believe in God. Funniest part is, if you're a professor at a school and have no science education since that one required class in undergrad, you're more likely to be an atheist or materialist than any of the science faculty.
Hey.
Is that true?
Yes, 100% true.
Draw your own conclusions.
I know. You
said you had a theory about that?
I do. I do have a theory about that. I was thinking strictly about the physical sciences, though, and the biological sciences, not so much the social sciences. I think that physicists like myself are more prone to believe in things that are paradoxical, because I'm not going to say quantum. I don't want to get trippy about quantum mechanics, because I don't get trippy about quantum mechanics.
But Paul's the ocean.
Yeah, thank you. I am actually. But I think physicists are more likely to deal with things that really are, in a discursive, logical sense, contradictory a little bit. Also, I believe, separate from that biologists are more tuned into the dark side of creation, the dark side of the physical world. I think that the idealisms of physics lead towards a kind of Platonism that removes you from the actual realities of and the difficulties and, quite frankly, the flood of death that is evolution. The tsunami of death that is evolution. We don't think about that stuff. We think about galaxies like big glittering pinwheels and little, subatomic tops that spin around and nice little patterns, and it's all very mathematical and quite beautiful, but we're removed from that.
Interestingly enough, if you think about the social sciences, they're staring death and suffering in the face even more intimately.
Right.
Fascinating.
Mathematicians, same way. I don't know what the numbers are on mathematicians, but they're like physicists, only more so.
Oh, I thought you meant they were about suffering. I'm like, math is hard, but it's not that hard.
I tell my students,
I can't solve for X, damn it.
I tell my students that physics is like beating your head against a wall. Do you know why?
Why?
Because it feels really good when you stop.
Oh my goodness. So you have a new book coming out.
Yeah.
Say something about it and talk about miracles, because
miracles. Okay, I'll say something about the book. That's easy to talk about. The miracles, I'll maybe throw in a comment or two.
Whatever.
You're the condiment?
Yeah.
I'll throw in a condiment or two. Maybe some ketchup. Sorry, I'm drunk.
Yes, I am. I don't know where Tony is. Yeah, he's over there. I've got a book due in less than 2 months now, and my God, am I aware of that?
Have you started?
I started. Yeah.
I made a Word file. That counts.
Yeah, I do. .docx. And it's due in a couple months. And what it really is going to be, I'm not sure when it will come out. They'll decide that later. It's really kind of as most direct and straightforward and simple language as I can. I'm discussing the relation between science and faith, science and religion, science and spirituality. And I'm doing it, I'm actually removing words that are native to my lexicon. I'm taking out long words, putting in short ones, and I think it's a better thing, makes it better. But basically, it's a simple, maybe 120 page book that lays out as directly and simply as possible as I can the relation between science and faith. And the talk I gave today was just the first couple of chapters of it. I want to apply that simple model to miracles and etc. So speaking of miracles.
Are miracles a thing?
I don't know.
I really feel like the sales of this book could go up if you have an answer.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yes.
I respect that answer personally.
Yeah. My answer is actually yes. I find it difficult as a Christian to answer no to that.
But how do you define
It's not that hard, really.
No, it's not that hard. It's not that hard.
So
I'm an academic. I go to shades of gray as quickly as possible, and that's not always good.
I just want you to know that saying you go to shades of gray as quickly as possible.
He didn't say 50. He just said shades of gray. He didn't specify half of
How
100.
many? How many?
It was a song on Jars of Clay's second album.
That's true. It was.
Yeah. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
There's no leather in that album.
I didn't know
I don't know what you were thinking about.
I'm a godless heathen.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here.
No, I have a question. This is my question. Whenever I get asked a question of miracles by congregants and youth, I feel like all of them have uploaded some program in their head called David Hume. And David Hume has lots of problems with him.
I know. I've read Hume on miracles,
which is just utterly problematic for lots of scientific reasons. But the assumption in David Hume's understanding of miracles is that God and the world are so distinct that for God to act, it has to be an abrogation of the world as it is. And I'm just like, why did you let a skeptic and or atheist and or antagonistic person towards reality define the definition of miracle and set the terms? The other is, it's not technically until Thomas Aquinas in his Contra Gentilius that question 100, paragraph 3, that you actually have someone assert that God's reality is verified by divine intervention, where you don't have double causation, like earthly and heavenly,
I got you.
but like interventionists. And I'm just like, how hard is it for Protestants to say Aquinas sucks sometimes? And the other is, how hard is it to say that Hume, who has lots of daddy issues, and his a priori commitments philosophically are utterly problematic if you use Tylenol and receive, modern medicine, then why do we have to define miracles in a way that for them to happen, God has to basically intervene in the world?
Right. I'm with you.
I just think it's a horrible definition. And you want to know who the most Humean people I've ever met are? Conservative evangelicals.
The most
they're
what?
God did intervene and break every rule of this God-loved creation.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, that proves God. And I'm like, that's just horrible. It's not as annoying as liberal Christians. It's like everything's a miracle.
Yeah.
Oh, that's mine.
Oh,
I use that all the time. I'll use that in the Q&A tonight.
you should. Because it's like a Christian in Denmark. If everyone's a Christian, no one's a Christian, and you need a Kierkegaard. Oh, theology nerd, slow clap. That's what I'm talking about. Attack upon Christendom, subjective truth. Stick it to Christendom. Yeah.
I said this last time we had a podcast together. Talking to you is like an out-of-body experience. It's like my body, like watching this.
You had one of my favorite first questions I've ever asked on a live podcast.
What was that?
I'm not going to tell you because I want them to download the last time you came on.
No, that was a while ago.
They had to do with our quantum entanglement.
Yeah, we had Catherine Keller. Are you asking me to talk about quantum entanglement?
No.
Good.
Science Mike's going to ask the last question because he doesn't, he's sat down right there.
I just like hearing you talk, Tripp.
Isn't it fun? I mean,
the level of your affirmation is so high. But we're going to talk to Kenda about, you have some parenting issues with teenagers we're going to work out.
Oh,
I do.
So do you?
Yes. So
I
yes,
can't
ask
wait
you
for
the
this.
last science question.
Do you have a science question for me, Mike?
A science question for you. Let me think. Through the haze of scotch.
In the meantime, what's your favorite indie rock band?
My favorite indie, I don't have an answer to that question. I listen to white guy Americana.
Okay, what's your favorite Cracker Kana band?
Jason Isbell.
All right, good. What's your favorite Jason Isbell song?
My favorite Jason Isbell song?
Uh-huh.
Live Oak. Anybody know that song?
That's like
Nobody knows that song. I feel at home here.
Have you ever seen Love Tractor?
No, but I know
Well, they're from your hometown.
of Love Tractor.
Okay. Pylon?
Yes, I've not seen Pylon.
Yeah, that's like quality.
Yeah.
We're going for Georgia Americana. Have you thought of a question? This is
I
triple.
did.
Now, REM I've seen about 100 times. But they used to be indie,
No.
Yeah.
Indie
I'll just sit and wait for an
go
explicit
ahead.
invitation forever.
Okay, so Science Mike, if you could ask a final question.
What's the last thing you read from the sciences that filled you with wonder?
The last thing I read from the sciences that filled me with wonder. I don't know if I've mentioned her before because she's on my mind. I don't know if it's sciences or not, but Annie Dillard. I read Annie Dillard. Annie Dillard, she wrote the book that I would write in my afterlife. Yeah. And she wrote Pilgrim on Pilgrim.
So let's say hypothetically.
Yeah.
Someone had never heard of this person.
Yeah, this
And you want
person
to relay to them what was wondrous.
This person is a writer of the first magnitude, and she chronicles a year at a creek in the woods near her house in Roanoke, Virginia, and she talks about science and religion without talking about science and religion. It's one of those literary things. They kind of leave it hanging out there, and you got to figure it out, But she talks about a year at the creek. She talks about the animals and the woods and the stars and everything. And she brings theology into it. And it is for me, the single most transcendent book I think I've read. It makes me angry how good it is. It's like, nobody should be able to write that good. That kind of thing.
Right on.
Yeah. And she says she's not a scientist, but she's like you. She's not an official scientist, but she's read deeply and broadly, and she speaks like a scientist. So
awesome.
Hard to tell the difference.
So
sometimes.
what we want to do is have everyone thank Paul while Kenda's coming up.
If you haven't noticed, I don't take it very seriously. I sit down and drink booze. The weird thing is, I think I have more parenting questions than science questions. Yeah, I think science is really simple compared to raising children. They keep becoming their own individual selves at inconvenient times. My youngest daughter's name is Macy, and for her whole life, I would call her my Macy. Do you know why? Alliteration. Just sounded good to my ear. And 2 weeks ago at a party, I said, "You're my Macy and I love you so much." And she goes, "Dad, I'm not your Macy."
And you said, "Whose Macy are you?"
She's her own, right? I was actually proud she asserted her individuality, and slightly embarrassed she said that in front of 25 people. I was like, oh man, I am the patriarchy.
I am the patriarch.
So here's my question. 44% of people in the United States will go through a faith transition at some point in their life. And many, many, many of them, according to their emails, do so while being a parent of a child who can't go through a faith transition because they're still in the initial stages of faith formation. What on earth do we tell our children about God when we don't know what we think about God?
That's your first question?
I thought it was thoughtful.
No, it's great. I'm just saying, I'm so glad you didn't ask me that.
People ask me and I go, that's a great question. Let me tell you a long story while I think of an answer. We're vamping for you, by the way, just as long as you need.
Well, that's a great question. Let me tell you a story. First of all, there are 100 people in this room who should be sitting here answering parenting questions. This is like the most terrifying role to ever be in, is to try to say, oh, here's how to, because I see my kids are grown now and they actually turned into wonderful functioning human beings. But No.
Yeah, that's a pretty good opener.
No, but I'm 1 for 1 on the faith part. So, and that sentence belies the problem, right? I'm 1 for 1. I do this professionally, right? So I'm supposed to be able to, and at some point it dawns on you that, oh, wait a second, this life, they have their own life. They're not you. And I can think of the moment when I remembered coming to that conclusion. It might be like the my Macy, is that her name?
Macy, yes.
So I don't know. I don't know what but you're right. Parents don't know what they think. And what's more, they don't have confidence in what they think. And I think the big thing I'm getting here at this conversation is, science tells a better story a lot of times than the church does anyway. And I want to say that as a Christian, I think the Christian story is a pretty good story. But the fact is we don't tell that story. We tell other stories because they're safer or they're more swallowable or, they won't raise eyebrows or whatever it is. We just chicken out most of the time, or we don't know it ourselves. And science feels like a much more compelling story. And I've not found anything I can say to my kids that they would care to listen to. So it's not like what I ever say, right? And sometimes my husband and I just look at each other and go, well, shoot, we're just going to have to make, life as a Christian look like fun. And
that's really profound, actually.
I actually think joy is a pretty good evangelism strategy, And
that is tweetable. Joy is an evangelism strategy. That's a very tweetable statement.
Cool.
It's better than like internalizing guilt and shame on behalf of a transcendent deity.
Yeah, I think you guys can take it from here. Yeah.
I was just affirming how smart and eloquent you are.
Anyway, it sounds like Macy's gonna have her stuff together.
Oh, yeah, she's full of fire.
Yeah, and if she's full of fire, you know what that is. The Holy Spirit.
Oh, I so often forget to use religious imagery in my daily thinking. She's full of fire. Thermal energy. Metabolism? It's metabolism, isn't it?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't yet have children,
it's so worth it.
Aren't you so excited one day to have these experiences?
You've educated youth ministers for a long time, and a lot of times when you go to div school, seminary, and such, you're already a practicing youth minister because parents are like, I don't want to talk to them, let's do the untrained person. What are the questions you used to hear with a higher frequency that have gone down, and what are the newest ones that have emerged?
Oh, wow. There used to be questions like, I want to be a youth minister, or I want to be a minister, or I want to be ordained. I'm not seeing as much of that anymore. But it's not that it's not there. But I think people have a much broader understanding of what their role is as people who are Christian leaders. I don't think they're feeling quite as, well, I think the institution is, sufficiently, what's the word I want, dilapidated maybe, to, that they're not so interested in, propping it up. So they want to do other things. I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. The stuff that is new that I'm hearing, I think has to do with the fact that you can't assume anymore that the people in your church are Christians. You can't even assume that church is a thing. You just have to assume that you're called to be somehow somebody whose life is going to point to Jesus in whatever way it is that makes sense in your context. And sometimes it looks like a church, and sometimes it doesn't look anything like a church. And a lot of people don't want it to look anything like this thing that we've come to call youth ministry, because youth ministry has become an industry in some ways. And what we know to be ministry isn't an industry. And so we don't have good language for this, right? Yeah. So we just say, well, I want to work with youth, or I love kids, or I want to be a witness, but don't put me in that youth ministry box. It's a real problem with language. We don't have a better language to describe it. All we know is that there is something that this generation of apostates are telling us that is good and true. And it may be that we're not doing such a good job institutionally, and we may just have to do it relationally. At least in terms, not that the institution doesn't give us an opportunity to have relationships, but it might be that, we got the cart before the horse. And if we start with figuring out how to build communities and relationships, we'll get around to the church part.
In students.
Yeah.
In students' third year, what are the questions you want them to pick up and be disturbed by, or when you hear them wrestling with them, you go, theological education actually benefited you? Because I think there is an anxiety in theological education because of, lots of reasons, about whether we matter, what are we doing well, or even preparing people for something that existed after the 60s, and all that kind of stuff. But as someone who, you get feedback a lot more when you work with people that go and work with students.
Right.
What does externalizing your faith, questions, spirituality, and such look like when you think they've really benefited from 3 years in this intense intellectual, spiritual, communal formation?
I guess I'm thinking of particular people, right? There's one guy he's actually really good at looking at the community, the political situation, the actual world situation he's in, and naming sin. He does it through a concept called Han, which is out of Asian theology, but he names it in a fresh way. I think that's a good thing. I mean, and then I think there's the other people who are, looking at what they are going to be doing in some kind of an institutional position, but understanding that what they are really there to do is to, participate with God in building a new thing. That what they're going into is a platform. It's not the box they have to fit into. It's what they're going to use to kind of grow up this new thing that looks like ministry that they may not even have a vision for yet. And I think the other thing is the people who don't think that they're going out with anything that looks like a master of anything, that would be a real misnomer when it comes to divinity. So, I think the ones that I have most confidence in are the ones who go out pretty humble.
Mike's going to ask
you. Should have just dropped the mic on the floor.
Yeah.
Not set it on the table. Just. Masters of Divinity.
One of my
wow, that's a terrible term.
There is a southern dessert called divinity. Oh, so it's white, fluffy powdered sugar.
And sticky.
Yeah.
Just saying.
It basically hates low-carb diets, so...
As does the entire South.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to pick between Jesus and eliminating carbs, the South would just be like, I don't know, Florida Supreme Court should decide. But he was an ethics professor, and at the gathering of the graduating students and faculty before your divinity school graduation, he came in with a big plate of divinity, and he said, and he's from West Texas, so he said, now I just want you to know, the only thing you're a master of is these delectable delights. And I'd like to demonstrate right now how to appropriately eat the divinity. And he grabs it. And now this guy's like late 80s. And he goes, and you enjoy it. No crumbs, no powdered sugar on the clothes. Now you're a master of divinity. Otherwise, keep asking questions. It was hilarious. That was my vamping for you to ask the last question. I
actually listened to you. You start talking, I'm just like...
It's like the opposite of when I co-host with Tony.
Yeah, I'm just like, complete your thought. I'm attentive and interested.
He's talking right now. Just look at him.
I mean, I have plenty of questions. I'm trying to not give another unanswerable one. But that's parenting, right? It's just unanswerable question after unanswerable question after no matter what I do, they're going to have to go to therapy, and it's my fault. Like, that's just parenting. Like, I love them more than anything, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep them safe, and I'm going to probably hurt them more than anyone else ever will. And it's going to be, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, the other day, I was playing video games. I play video games. This is important. I was playing Fortnite.
You were?
I was playing Fortnite.
We got a friend on that. I've gotten brought into this from Elgin. And he's like, don't any of your internet friends play Fortnite? Can't we be friends? Because I won't let him friend people he doesn't know in real life or I don't know. I
play, and this current match, out of 100 people, there were 8 of us left.
Uh-oh.
And I was like...
But were you in the bush? Because that's cheating to get...
I was not in the bush, but what I do is I do just hide and wait. And then the storm moves, and I move to another place and hide and wait. Because even in a video game, I don't want to shoot somebody. So, that's true. Ask the people I play with. I'm like, I can't shoot someone. What I do is if I'm playing on a team, I just run around and revive people.
Are you serious?
Yes, peace be with you. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. Hold down Eid. Peace be with you. Jesus loves you and I do too. So I was number 8.
You are a youth minister. You didn't know it.
My daughter comes in, this time my older daughter, and she says, hey, Dad, you got a second? I was like, well, I'm number 8 in Fortnite for the first time. So can we talk in a minute? And she goes, sure, I just wrote a song for you. So I finished the round and then heard it. So, given that we're terrible people, what can we do as parents of faith to make sure our children know we really do care about them? And that they'll remember that in therapy. Oh, wait, that was supposed to be an easy question.
Maybe when your daughter wants to play you a song. I don't know.
Well, she didn't say, hey, Dad, can I play you a song? She said, hey, Dad, do you have a second? I mean, what priority are we talking about? I'm number 8 in a round of Fortnite.
That's pretty legit.
Never fired a shot.
Beats me. I mean, I don't know how else to do anything. it's not that I don't use words, when I'm with my kids to the point, but they always roll their eyes and they're like, oh my gosh. They do know, and they've known from the time they were 3 that if they wanted to stay up later, ask a theological question right at the time you're supposed to go to sleep. And then mom is gone at that point. But somebody said to me once that, was somebody that I absolutely vehemently disagree with on everything theologically. But he was saying that, at the end of the day, you can't do faith to somebody else. You can only work on yours. We can only be who God calls us to be. And God has given us these kids to walk with and to be light in their life to the extent that it's possible for us. But man, we screw it up. I screw it up. I want a do-over. My son's turning 30. I still want a do-over. And, I think he was right. I mean, I think the bottom line is it's not about them. It's about me and what I do to, try to stay clear-headed and walk with God and to let my life reflect that.
Amen. Beautiful.
So join me in thinking, Kenda.
In every Ask Science Mike I've ever done, there are far more questions than opportunities to answer. So if you're polite and wait, your question will not get answered. There we go. See? Never takes more than 6 seconds. Well, he's close. There we go.
From your various disciplines, what makes us moral?
From your various disciplines, what makes us moral?
Dude, your low end just came in. It was like...
Moral. That's my announcer voice. Do you want to take the first stab at how we create morality?
Morality is primarily a cultural and social evolution to create in-group cooperation across a species over 120 people so that you could survive in a competitive environment in which nice guys and nice cultures were finished first. And then over time, morality had the possibility of having an more inclusive expansion of the kinship network. And the radical part of Christianity is that Jesus offered a vision of the kinship network in which your enemy was included.
You included all my shit and then some. Yeah, that sounded real similar. I did not expect that.
Bradley Schmookler, I don't know how you spell the name, wrote a book called The Parable of the Tribe. It's excellent about that topic.
Okay, next question. Ask Theology Tripp.
Dude, Tony said don't talk more than 3 minutes for an answer, so I just was like going straight.
You did it. You could do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Who's next? You agree with that? Yeah. Morality is a thing we evolved in order to survive. Like if you want like a more like, how do you create a morality in our contemporary sociological framework?
That's the second question.
That is a second question. What, do you want the answer to that one? Yeah, you consider not violating the consent of others, allow people personal and body autonomy, and avoid either through application of agency or active negligence the production of unnecessary suffering in the lives of others.
What in the other element is you don't create a mythology with rights around property that instantiates systemic oppression and evil around people of color and people of a lower class. That libertarians give, I don't know, you might have heard it in the first talk today, a mythology around property rights and a mythology around the creative destruction of capitalism. And if you just justify those points along with the first three, then you actually don't get the moral evolution that the Enlightenment actually made possible as they externalize the moral reflection out of monotheistic traditions into a cultural place where you don't have to assent to particular truths to embody and share certain moral commitments.
Paul, it really is like an out-of-body experience. It is, yeah. I feel like Carol Ann, I keep going to the light. Sorry, that's a poltergeist reference. You people are too young. Who's next? Next person can't be a dude. The person following you can't be a dude. I'll be more explicit.
Yeah, that was like counter Science Mike love.
That's Scotch Mike, actually, not Science Mike.
All right, what is the relationship between psychedelic substances and authentic, mystical, or spiritual experience with the divine?
Are y'all planting people in my podcasts? Psychedelic community? How does this come up at literally every event multiple times?
That's what I'm talking about. So in October, we're going to do an event called the Cosmic Campfire, where you're the first to hear this other than, I told my wife because it was on our calendar.
I haven't told my wife yet, so you're hearing this before my wife.
But I hope it's on your calendar. So it's called Cosmic Campfire, and the whole goal is to set a religion science framework that then, in the second conversation we do, what was the title that you were like, this is the most marketable title of all time?
I don't remember.
All right, so we'll edit it in. It was something about like sex, drugs, and Jesus.
Something like that.
But it was cooler. I don't remember.
It was. Answer the question. So neurologically, what is the relationship between psychedelics and authentic mystical or spiritual experiences? They're pretty much the same. When we brain scan people on psychedelics, it looks like what happens when you ask, monks or gurus who have a lot of experience meditating and can go into a state of oneness. The brain's doing the same thing. So there's obviously like a lot of fascination and interest in psychedelics in our culture today. Probably a shockingly high amount. If you're over 35, you aren't aware how much interest and also lack of concern there are about these substances. So part of this I find really encouraging because I'm a person that just kind of naturally, my brain's just like, hey, you know what would be good right now? A mystical experience. I'm like, really, brain? I'm just driving. You should probably pull over.
But that is not Science Mike affirming shrooms while driving.
No, that's me just like, if the sun looks pretty, my brain's like, you are the ocean. You are the wave. Like my brain just does it. I just a little LSD factory gland in there just occasionally is like, hey, man, you want to trip balls? And I didn't take anything. I'm just all of a sudden like, God is everywhere. That's just me. I've always been that way. I was the kid who's like, hey, Mom, God was talking to me about my homework. Really? Yeah. That's great. Okay. So neurologically, you're very similar. What concerns me when I go back to like the LA woo thing, just because mushrooms come from the earth doesn't automatically mean they're healthy and good for you. So like we have some scientific literature that shows really profound emotional health benefits from occasional scientifically administered doses of psilocybin or LSD. And these things were produced in laboratories by grad students and are very pure, and their dosage are carefully controlled. What you buy from Joe on the street...
Do you mean Shaman Joe?
Sure, whoever. There's no telling what's in it. And also, when we consume medical substances in the West, they've undergone an incredibly rigorous process of trial and test that encompasses hundreds or thousands of intersected studies. And if you look at how many total experiments have been on psychedelics since the 60s, it's dozens. So what's the long-term health cost? You don't know, right? So the thing I find encouraging about psychedelics is that they could potentially open certain aspects of spirituality to people who don't have naturally trippy brains like me. What I find concerning is people approaching these substances too casually. They are federal crimes. That's pretty important.
For some.
You'll go to prison. And then second of all, you don't actually know what the long-term implications are. And people, if they take them, some people take them like touristically, like, oh man, you know what would go great with this record? Some LSD. And
so
I
you
feel
don't
like
assess that based on what record they're talking about?
Well, I don't know, maybe. But my point is, if you look at indigenous cultures that have used these things as teachers, they were rites of passage things. They were occasional major life events. They weren't like, it's Thursday and I'm kind of bored. And that's not how I think you should approach the divine either. So I would say, like, what would I hope for? I would love to see psychedelics descheduled at a federal level first for clinical research. And I'd love to get 15 or 20 years of good decadal studies on these substances so we can accurately understand the long-term implications of their usage. And then if things look okay, just like marijuana, let's make them okay for recreational use. But also, by the way, right now we're legalizing marijuana and we haven't done the research. We're just kind of haphazardly, well, you know, it could turn out 40 years from now that there's something about marijuana that's as bad as cigarettes were. We don't know. We haven't done the science. And to be true to science and a lack of information, you just don't project assumptions. You wait for data. So, I don't like the kind of taboo, moralistic blanket prohibition against psychedelics. Nor do I like, hey man, it's from the earth, so it's okay.
Do you think that if the very same relationship to the data was employed about anything that was connected to market capitalism or the environment, we'd have a completely different society? Because if you were like, oh, well, the data is out, we don't really know yet, we should investigate more, so in the meantime, I don't know, we probably shouldn't, I think we should lower the low end on my microphone. That taboos, when you talk about them in a religious context, are treated with a level of delicacy you don't treat other topics. And so,
I mean, for most people,
yeah. So
I'm not particularly careful.
No, but I'm just saying,
taboo.
like, for me, if you're just thinking the science,
yeah,
and you're like, let's be cautious about the weed and the mushrooms and that, but in the meantime, just drive an SUV and use a lot of carbon footprint and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To me, like, if you're just basing it on science, we would reevaluate a lot of things, and it just. And
I think we should. That's why I'm Science Mike. That was my only point. The same methodology applied to a lot of our lifestyle would be significant. I have a marijuana vape pen that I have. When I moved to California, my neurologist who treats my crippling brain injury migraines was like, listen, I've got a friend, he's a researcher, he's seeing some really promising things with cannabinoids. It'll be legal where you're going. If it helps, good. Like, in the advice of a physician, he said, you should try this thing. And so I got a vape pen, and I didn't do anything with it. I put it on a shelf. And then I had, what happens to me is I start to see a really bad distortion in my left eye. And then I'll either get like a really severe headache or a severe headache, and I'll lose vision in my left eye for 12 to 24 hours. So I got like, I'm looking at my screen, and all of a sudden there's a picture, and the person's midsection disappears, just a head and feet. Like, okay, here we go, migraine time. I guess I'll go lie down. I'm like, oh, wait, I've got that pen. So I went, oh, my gosh, I'm going to die. My lungs are on fire. And then it stopped. And then I didn't get a migraine. And then I also I have brain fog every afternoon, and I didn't have any brain fog for 4 weeks. Right? So now I've been in California a year. My vape pen, which is good for 30 doses, it has 60% left. So I'm like a frequent user.
You're not very good at smoking weed.
But my approach to weed is primarily not oh man, this would be great with pizza. Although actually it is.
Surprise, surprise.
And actually, that's a true story.
Yeah.
My
you
primary
were
approach.
like, does anyone on Yelp deliver Funyuns?
My approach is literally, I have a brain injury, and if this helps, not only does it helps better than the other medicines I've tried. And unlike the other migraine medicines I take, which as I take them, I need them more and more. When I take this, I need it less and less. So my time between dosing actually increases, not decreases. But as I do it, as a person who's science-minded, like, I'm so concerned about the limited clinical insight. So that's a decision I made in conjunction with my primary care physician, a neurologist, and a research scientist. Like a significant conversation with 3 parties who said, this is legal where you live. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, you're still Southern Baptist on the inside. I'm just saying, as someone that spent 10 years in L.A., like, you could have just asked your youth group. And they would have said, it's all good, and guess what, Mike? You were the wave. And the ocean.
Does that work, the answer? Okay. Who's next?
No, a female is next.
Yes. But which particular one was my question? Go ahead. It's you.
So on the same track of brain modification substances, what might you say to a student who clearly needs depression or anxiety medication, but is afraid to do that because it messes with their mind? So
I have been the youth minister of, last I counted, it was like 320 some teenagers, both over like 16 years. And then because of a survey I got asked about the number of ones who had prescribed psych meds on trips you were on, it was 72. So you do the math, that's like a legit percentage of people. The number...
Isn't that how you quantify statistics, Paul? And as we can see here, it's a legit percentage of the control group.
I just know it was a legit percent. A legit percent, Mike. Even in a congregation where the relationship to prescribing psych meds wasn't as much a taboo, it was within the group. And even in a situation where the resources in Los Angeles for mainline Protestant youth ministers, there's lots of support groups that inform you and help you figure out, to not violate the insurance policy of your congregation when you go on youth trips because your property's worth a lot of money. That's probably the primary motivating factor, or Jesus. To not get sued. They provide a lot of support structure. The biggest question to me around like the availability of meds has to do with the stigma around saying, I need help. And sometimes it's meds. Sometimes it's someone to listen in a private situation. Sometimes it's someone to go have weird fun with and just celebrate with you. There's so many responses to an individual who their experience in coming of age. And if you think back to being a teenager, something that's like a level 2 emotional moment, it existentially feels like whatever the highest number of your scale, like it's turned up to 11 and you're like, why? Because she wasn't going to go with me to the dance. And you're like, death and destruction, nihilism. And so one of the gifts a youth minister has is affirming and being present in student stories so that when parents or teachers or whoever it is that begins a conversation around using meds, like you can speak back to them their own narrative and their own experience at a time. Like you felt shame here. You were like wanting to know if you had a place here. Like you can help them remember their own experience, because teenagers have this wonderful gift of the moment it's good to say that's how it's always been. And you're like, You kept me up like 3 nights in a row telling me you didn't know if you belonged on this planet. And 6 months later, you're like, I just like feel like joy oozing over everything. And you know, like their identity switches and stuff. So,
well, and teenagers ooze a lot anyway.
I mean, yeah, like that's obviously why the Ninja Turtles were teenage. And so when I think of those psychological issues, I feel like one of the things is that religious people need to know they have to refer at the right time. Like, it's not your job. And the other side is you're going to be their friend no matter what decision their medical, psychological, or parental units decide for them. So not taking sides on conclusions, but taking their side regardless of what it is the ministerial affirmation, I would say. And that doesn't mean if they're lying to their parents, you don't call them and go, I just want you to know your intuitions were correct. They're lying to you. But I don't want to say any more. They probably need help in this way. Or if their counselor says they want to talk to you. It's just, as their ally, it's ridiculous to cut off contact point because of a particular conclusion around like how you do medication and stuff. And you're going to be the one that knows they have it regardless. And I'll say that just as someone who has like ADHD and went through that weird period of being the person that had their medicine, unlike people that just took Dimetap, did not have to get distributed by the youth minister. It doesn't matter if it makes you a better person. It's just creepy as hell that your youth minister has to give you a little pill and the person with a headache didn't. Because teenagers professionally pick small things, turn them into, I don't know, eternity, and then freak out about it. And so the biggest gift I think we get when it goes to teenagers figuring out how their chemistry works, their psychology works, is just being present and affirming, regardless of what shows up. Because if you can do that, the group's more likely to do it. And if you can't, you get stuck taking sides between a doctor and a parent and a kid. And that is a family systems theory triangle. I just got a GTFO.
The one thing I would say, there's 2 things that seem to be true to me in America right now. 1, many people have a personal or social prejudice against medications that provide mental health benefits that need to be knocked down. Also true, many people put too much faith in medications whose clinical trials involve durations of a period of time between 6 weeks and 12 months. So the people who designed it, that's the Scotch talking. The people who designed most of our antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications did so with an understanding that these would be substances designed to provide someone a temporary boost in conjunction with other mental health interventions and not be on them permanently. Because what we are finding is when you're on most antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications for the long term, their efficacy in treating symptoms drops. So you have to boost the dosage, which creates new side effects. And if you don't, or if you hold the dosage steady, they lose the benefit of the medication. And if you stop taking the medication, they go through severe neurological withdrawal. And I don't like to say that a lot because if I say that, it provides ammo for people resisting the use of these medications who should use them. So there's a lot of complexity here. I think one of the most important things we can do when people are facing anxiety or depression is offer real solidarity and honesty. I am a person who has struggled tremendously with depression and suicidal ideation. And so I can offer empathy there, but I also have to be honest in that every time in my life I've had severe depression, it has been situational depression and not clinical depression, meaning when I figure out what is the circumstance driving my depression and address it, my depression goes away. But for people suffering from clinical depression, There may not be any experiential or environmental factor they can change. They literally have an asymmetric level of activity between two parts of their nervous system that have biased them basically to a more melancholy life outlook than someone like me who is just kind of naturally sanguine. So I would say to someone suffering depression, I've been there. And I also don't understand what you're going through. Mm-hmm. And that the important thing is that I want to affirm the fact that you have spoken up and been honest about how you feel. And I want you to know that you are not alone and you will not be alone. And I don't judge you, and you shouldn't be embarrassed for wanting to seek help and take care of yourself. And in the meantime, we need to do some more science.
So my question, I guess, is kind of predicated on this statement. So, but don't worry, it's quick. Heteropatriarchy is sort of like baked into a lot of theology, philosophy, scientific, stuff. So the question is, as two white, presumably straight men.
We're both married with children and married to females, so yeah.
Right. Presumably is a good word to use there. I agree. Yeah.
So, as two white, presumably straight men, how do you respond to the, as I see it, obligation to confront that sort of heteropatriarchy and just the mess that is in your midst?
So, if you're a youth minister, play a game. And Monica Coleman, who is a woman, a theologian, she was on my dissertation committee. We co-taught a class, and this was an exercise she came up with, which I then did as a youth minister who was co-teaching a class with her. She said, track who talks in your youth group, and then decide, is that the voice of God? And I did it. And after that, I don't know if I've told her this, so Monica, if you're listening, you are correct. But when in doubt, patriarchy can run through the most progressive UCC church in Los Angeles. So just know that. The second part is, if you keep track and are intentional and ask for other voices to speak because they aren't socialized into wanting to be heard, then with teenagers, it takes 6 months for all the ladies to have feels and want to share. And they're like, let me tell you, I don't know about you fellas, but I already knew the liturgical text for this week, so I read it in advance and I have some thoughts. I Googled it. And one of my youth would say, I Googled the text followed by Rosemary Bradford Ruther, because I know if she ever said anything about it, I wanted to find out what the person, the author of God and Sexism, said about it. And then she would present a voice and a contribution in it that you didn't know. And so a lot of times, if you're at a congregational level, the issue of patriarchy and voices is a lot bigger than if you're at a youth group level, because every year you cycle out people and bring new ones in, and they go what's this community mean? What does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be here? And if you can create normative expectations of voicing and such, it can shift rather dramatically. So, before that experience, I was a youth minister 7 years, and after it, I was a youth minister 9. And I've had 40 youth that became ministers. If you took the youth that became ministers in the last half, they're 3/4 female, and it's 1/4 before. And the only difference that changed was that I said, can you pause and let a female talk? It was not that hard. And no one at a UCC or Disciples of Christ youth group is like, I can't believe you, Tripp. This is part of the radical Marxist agenda, asking for ladies to talk. They're just obviously.
I thought UCC were radical Marxists.
No, on the weekends. But I just mean, it's not like it's offensive or anything. The moment you mention it, it gets internalized, and then the youth self-select. They're like, oh, well, I really feel like you should talk first. And it got to the point where you'd have 4 females in a row. And one of my favorite youth, Serena, she is now in divinity school. She said, I really have something to say, but if a guy would actually like to contribute to this before I talk. That was the first moment I realized that the first 5 years or so as a youth minister, that was kind of how it functioned. It was like dudes talking, and if you had something to say, you could break through. And so if we want to shift that, where it's not just conceptually affirming, but to affirming at an embodied level, youth ministers are the best place to do that. Because no youth gets mad at you that you think certain other youth should get to talk to. And they also all know they're all socially awkward and stuff. So half the reason the guy talks first is because he's socially awkward, and he knows that when socially awkward moments in his family get going, his dad probably talks first. Because that probably silences the question or complaint the females in the house had, and then they can move on and never address them.
I do a terrible job of dealing with heterosexism because it is almost invisible to me. I am white. I am male. I am straight. And a huge problem in my life is when I do even the most basic modicum of participation in justice, marginalized people line up to thank and affirm me. I have this, when I get dressed, I have a very careful regimen for how I get dressed. I reach into the closet and I grab a shirt without looking because they're all black or gray. And then when everyone comes out, I put on and don't think about again. And I have a shirt that says like "Rule Like Ruth," and it just lists all these feminist icons that one of my daughters gave me because we did a women's march together. And I was wearing that shirt on an airplane, and I forgot I was wearing the shirt. All I noticed was that I was getting literally so many cookies and drinks from the flight attendants. Literal cookies and literal alcohol. And I was like, this is a great day. And then as I'm walking off the plane, it was red wine, which I'm also a huge fan of. The woman of color flight attendant said, "Hey, I love your shirt, and I've never seen a man wear one like it." I wore a t-shirt. Let me tell you the level of personal sacrifice that decision involved in my life. I put it on without thinking, and for doing so, was literally heralded as a hero. I have a Black Lives Matter shirt I wear a lot. Same thing. I don't think about it. And then so many black men will give me like the nod that's not for white guys. And I go like, what's happening? And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm wearing a t-shirt. And occasionally I'll be sitting at a bar and an older white man will go, "You're a disgrace." And I go, man, I don't care what you think. You're the problem, right? It costs me nothing. It costs me nothing. So when I say, this is literally a thing. I say things that are outrageously outside the bounds of institutional Orthodox Christianity. And I get invited into the most conservative institutions and paid money to disagree with him. Meanwhile, my friend Rachel Held Evans, if they could burn her at the stake, they would, because she has a vagina and I have a penis. I do a terrible job of dealing with heterosexism. I just do my best. So here's a couple things I'm working on. One, intentionally creating space. At the liturgist gathering in theology, I stood up and said, "Hey, this is a guy, Paul, you might have heard of him. And he once said, I permit not a woman to teach or have authority over a man." And we forget he was talking to a specific community wherein there were priestesses who offered sexual sacraments, and it was kind of a problem. There were some dangerous rituals involving violence, and maybe Paul was a reckless patriarchy guy. He probably was. But I said, here's what we're going to do for the next hour. I permit not a man to teach or have authority over a woman. And then Michael Gungor and I sat down on the stage, and my wife and Lisa Gungor stood up and took the microphones. And before I did that, I said, and we are going to stay on stage as eye candy, as is so often the role of women in society. So we could sit there and smile and laugh and look adorable, but under no circumstances could we have the microphone. And at first, the room was silent, because being explicitly offered the floor was not something the women in the room had experienced, even in progressive spaces. It took, I think, 30 or 45 seconds for the first person to say something. And it started out with what? People thanking Michael and I for doing it. And then the grief started to come. And then the lament. And then the anger. And then the rage. And then the obvious discomfort of men in the room. And me and my Mr. Rogers self so desperately wanted to say, time out. Guys, it's going to be okay. Women have to do this all the time. And I thought to myself, no, they need this discomfort. This will teach them something I never could by making them comfortable. And an hour turned into 2 hours, turned into we'll come back after lunch and continue this. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. Because with men in the room, several hundred women for the first time were allowed to be truly and fully themselves, because the men weren't allowed to talk or offer commentary. The other thing I'm doing that I think is really important, I had a period not too long ago where I thought about retiring from public work because I'm white and straight and male. And I'm like, the last thing the world needs is another book from a white straight dude or another podcast with white straight dudes. Most of our listeners are women. Did you know that? Like 65% of the listeners of the Liturgist podcast are women. It's a similar number for Ask Science Mike. And when I started floating this idea with women in my life, they were like, why would you step down? I was like, because there's got to be space made. And they're like, you're one of the good ones. Convince a conservative asshole to step down. If you leave, what are we left with? And then I noticed around that same time the work of a man named Jordan Peterson, and many formerly progressive men who would have used the term social justice warrior in a non-derogatory context suddenly began to espouse the problem with the social justice movement. Right? Why? Because in justice work, rightfully so, we point out the problems with white supremacy and heterosexism. Rightly so. I am a trans-affirming person who has to catch myself calling God he all the time. Right? Rightly so. Those critiques are well earned. But the script we're handing progressive white men is, you're the oppressor, and that's your role. Your role is perpetual repentance. And even if that is correct, that doesn't groove with human psychology. So progressive men are reaching the end of a script and saying, well, I don't want to just be the oppressor. Jordan Peterson says the problem is with people who tweet too much. I'm not the problem. The tweeting people are the problem.
But he didn't just mean the president.
So the other thing I'm trying to do is offer through my life a new script for men. Right? If Jordan Peterson's going to take a bunch of young white men and show them how they should live, guess what? I'll do a better job. My wife is actually happy because I respect her as a person. So, if the answer in the traditional script is men are supposed to be strong protectors, I want to tell men our job is to be strong advocates, that we stand for people and not over them. If the traditional script is men are supposed to be stoic and emotionally reserved, and when they can't handle it, shoot other people, the new script is men are men when we are vulnerable and open with our feelings and trust other people in real community. The role in dismantling heterosexism for white men is to dismantle heterosexism in our own lives and support other men as they do the same. Because heterosexism does not come from women, and it doesn't come from people of color, and it doesn't come from trans people or lesbians or gay or bisexual or intersex. It comes from straight white men, and the only people who can get rid of the toxin completely are the ones unthinkingly producing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think one piece of this advocacy has to be a new script for white men that says, historically, we have been the oppressors, but now we have to, with intent and action, become something else.
So the last thing I want to say, and this is a quote from Sarah Heath, because she texted me, and Tony also told me, Tripp, stop talking. Y'all should wrap this up. Hold on, I got to find the text, because I'm not fabricating it. I really feel like y'all should end the podcast by talking about what doing ministry for the deconstructed looks like, because I don't know, but I feel like you're two of my friends that have talked about it. So the last question is, if you were talking to ministers, who the people that are attracted, connected, and making first contact with their congregation are people who have just walked out the room they were born into, but are thinking about walking into a place where communion and baptism still happens, what does that ministry look like?
I think it looks like embracing the embodiment of doubt, and the embodiment of doubt are questions. I'm not qualified to answer literally any questions other than questions about computer networks and operating systems. Those I can answer with authority. If you have a question about kernel extensions in Mac OS X, I'm
Praise
your guy.
the Lord.
If you want to know about IP6 and how to roll that out on your network, I can help you out. If you want to know about anything else, I'm just talking shit. So the value of my work is not in my education or credential, but my availability and my empathy, my acceptance of wherever people are. I actually think it's important. 48% of people who listen to Ask Science Mike identify as Republicans. 48%. That blew my mind.
What percentage atheist?
12.
There are more Republicans that listen?
Yes.
I would have totally guessed the other way around.
Atheists make up a really tiny percentage of the population.
But they're the cool ones.
54% of the audience identifies as no specific religious affiliation. So that is bigger than, anyway. But
that's
my
like
point
half
is,
of mainline Protestant congregations.
Yes.
If you play the game, raise your hand, are you a nun? Then you're like, why are the elders raising their hand that I'm a nun? And you tithe and show up half the time. It'll happen.
But I think that's the point. I think that understanding that people are in a situation where they've reached the end of answers and they're almost fatigued by all the schools of thought, and what they really want is to be accepted amidst that whole process without being required to subscribe to a new thing, without being required to say, no, here's the place you have to land first. A lot of these people, they're crash landing. They don't have any thrust left in the engines. They're gonna land where they land. And then everything's gonna blow up, and they need EMS workers more than they need theologians, right? I don't know. I can only answer with what my work looks like. And what my work looks like is an affirmation of the struggle that led people out of something that worked for them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily offer, a lot of times I talk with pretty prominent atheists, and you really confuse me as a Christian. You seem really comfortable. A lot of people read my book and they say, I read your book and now I'm back in church. I'm like, that's beautiful. And then an equal number of people say, I read your book and I don't believe in God anymore. And I say, that's beautiful. How are you? how's your Monday morning? How's your relationship with your children or your life partner or your parents or your community? That's the stuff that animates me.
So when you say that's beautiful, you're saying the effect of what I contributed to your spiritual journey led to more beautiful embodiment in the way you relate to yourself, to transcend to other, to community, to your neighbor, your friends, and such. I don't know. I might be a fundamentalist. The only doctrine I'm like really committed to is the incarnation. And I really feel like that would be the appropriate response. Like, in whatever way you narrate things so that your own embodiment has more beautiful relationships to yourself and your neighbor and the enemy and all that kind of stuff, then that would be the word being incarnated in that space. And I just want you to know there were Christians in the 18th century that said what I just said. So like, this isn't like weird liberal nonsense. This is like, we've had hundreds of years of Christians that have said this, and they're just kind of called Protestants. And so a lot of the anxiety that Americans have that lead them, one of the things that blew my mind about people that self-identified as atheists, but they came to the like Tuesday theology group, the Wednesday prayer group, and church, and would volunteer in LA, that blew my mind was I was like, and you self-identify as an atheist? I bet every church wished everyone that self-identified as a Christian showed up half as much as you and gave. And so I feel like there's been a like separation for those categories of theist, atheist, or whatever the hell those things mean. I don't know. And that they are sitting there functioning culturally when most of us, that battle that used to exist culturally where a theist and atheist would argue and reason, science and facts would have a fight, like it's now been internalized. And so the battle's not like Bill Nye, the science guy, battling out with Ken Ham yelling, it's a day, it's a day, it's a day, it's a day. Because honestly, if he said it any faster and had been drinking, his first bucket of scotch, it would sound like tongues. He would be like, it's a day, it's a day, it's a day. And that fracture, that battle line runs right through the middle of most people. That all of us are skeptics and believers at the same time. So we're believing skeptics, skeptical believers. And that part of what it means to be a faith community, if your community postulates the possibility of faith and honesty about the world and what we know, it means you get to be there as a believing skeptic or a skeptical believer, and your questions are invitations to faith, not means for your exclusion. And that the content of your faith is the material transformations of your embodiment, not your inability to, I managed to do the creed without crossing my fingers. And that type of thing. So,
achievement unlocked.
I just think of it when, like, Sarah asked a question on what does it look like to ministry for the deconstructed. A lot of them are people that want to know whether they can be fully themselves and fully affirmed at the table. And whether they can be fully themselves and the identity proclaimed over them at baptism is true. And I just want you to know, as a minister of the gospel, all of you that minister the gospel, this doesn't mean you don't have to affirm this in the fullness, but just to say, like, you've baptized a lot of people that have a lot of good questions and doubts. And God made them and knows them completely. You've served communion to people who were being assholes and you didn't know about it. And God loves them and knows them completely. And you've baptized and served communion to people when you were a scumbag. And God loves you and knows you completely. So if you want to be a church for the deconstructed, the best opportunity you have is just being yourself honestly. Because if you can name your doubts and your brokenness and all the things you're trying to deal with and be honest about, then you have made space at the table and in baptism for anyone and everyone who wants to hear someone else believe when they speak over them that you are God's beloved. That's fucking awesome. Like, it's literally fucking awesome that you don't have to cross your fingers when you hand them the bread and the wine and say you are God's beloved. The most true thing about you, regardless of what your parents said, your minister said, your peers at work, or your therapist said, is that you're God's beloved. What a beautiful gift. And most of you get to talk to teenagers. They don't know if they believe anything except things that demote themselves. And you get to tell them their parents are liars and they're God's beloved. And you get to tell them that when their teachers say they're not good enough, they're God's beloved. And when you get to tell them that so-and-so, they want to go to the dance with so-and-so, thinks you're scumbag, you're like, yes, and you're God's beloved. And so that like simple thing is connected to our propensity as humans to believe lies are true. When we believe lies are true, we act as if they are. And we put material reality into falsehood. It happens at the macro level and it happens in the micro level. In your family, you'll internalize things your parents said about you and you'll perform it, or your peers and such. And to me, when you're talking about ministry to the deconstructed, the greatest opportunity you have is to straight face, with all your nerdiness, say, yet the most true thing about you is you're made, known, loved, and affirmed by God. And there's nothing you can say that will change that. And when you do that, like, shit, I can't believe we get paid to do that. That's a crazy thing. We're in a world where they require ministers to tell just normal humans the most amazing truth. Like to say you're the product of a quantum fluctuation in a vacuum, billions of years evolved. Like no one gets done with that and it's like, oh, I really feel affirmed. But say the most true thing about you is.
That's my animating myth.
Well, I don't want to ruin that. So there's a multiplicity of animating myths, one of which, but I'm just saying that as ministers and thinking about what it means to have a community of the deconstructed, there is an invitation to affirmation that acknowledges a deconstructive element, but also acknowledges their humanity in ways that the market, their peers, culture, family, and religion often can't. And you're stewards of a mystery that big. That's amazing.
I gotta say one thing, because this is really important.
You should do the conclusion. I've been told to conclude.
Okay, this will be my conclusion. We tend to think of deconstruction as a thing evangelicals in skinny jeans do while drinking espresso. Right? That's the picture of deconstruction. And sure, I see those people at events, and they're lovely, by the way. But when I talk about deconstruction, I'm talking about someone who emailed me 2 weeks ago and said, I read your book and I want to pray again, but whenever I try to pray and imagine a God, I can only think of my uncle fondling my penis while asking me to read from the Bible.
Oh my God.
Deconstruction's not a goddamn parlor trick.
Yeah.
Some people have been hurt in the deepest possible way with explicitly Christian imagery. Mm-hmm. The word God breaks their heart. The idea that Jesus loves you is indecipherable from some severe form of personal or societal trauma. Ask a black child who grew up in a white church what the Jesus experience has meant to them since Trayvon Martin. This is not low stakes stuff. And so I would say to minister to the deconstruction, it is not enough to say you are God's beloved, because for some people saying that reinforces and deepens a trauma they are trying to move beyond. And I would argue a ministry for the truly broken, deconstructed, spiritually homeless, frustrated, I medicate myself with whatever I can find is a slightly reduced phrase, and it is simply, you are beloved. And if they say, by who? Me. Never let your faith allow you to take a step of distance and say only God does the loving. Because that's disembodied and it's uninteresting and it breaks hearts. if you believe in an empty tomb, your job is to love your neighbor and not say that God does. Told you I'd cry at least once.
Oh, I told you there was a very small chance I would. But I thought about it. The last thing I'd say is that a couple of months ago, I had an experience as a youth minister I never thought I'd have. I have a daily prayer list, so like every person I've ever confirmed, I pray for on a specific day of the week, which might be my residue of being a Baptist church planter's kid. But it does mean that you're reminded of individuals who are now like having their first children and realizing how old you are as their youth minister. And one of them was a student at Parkland High School. And it was on the day I prayed for him and his sister. His sister had never joined my youth group before they moved from California to Florida. But David Hogg was my youth student, was a youth in my youth group. And that morning, before I heard anything had happened, I had prayed for him and his family, just like I had prayed for him and his family every week. And I've done that for children who grew into youth, that grew into adults all over the country every time I've been their minister. And at no point did I think that prayer included, I hope you and your sister don't get shot. And it was an existential experience. After it, I showed up, I was talking to a friend of mine who I was like, I don't even know what to do with this. I called his mom. We were talking on the phone. She's freaking out, blah, blah, that, like checking back in and stuff. And a couple of weeks later, the reconnection happens with him, and the moment that was most affirming to me coming out of tragedy and thinking like, how can my faith inspire organizing and activism around gun violence and stuff, was when he said, oh, it's totally cool to respond. I've already talked to insert like 10 names of other youth that were in the youth group who hollered at him, 2 of which were his confirmation senior youth, who like they're 4 years older than him when he began confirmation. And we're just like, this is what we decided to show up for. And I found out, like, I thought I was showing up for pastoral care, and the students themselves have already done it. And so one of the things I think so often for us as ministers that think about challenges and such is we think we have to be in a position and be in the know where we show up. And in that like crazy extreme experience, they had realized that the community, the relationships, the affirmation that happened in them was the point. And that they had already showed up and they already knew how to connect before I ever figured it out. And I find that to be a possibility that's inspiring past the normal terms of religious community. I'm going to stop talking.
Oh, that's the best end to a podcast ever.